You don't have to do anything at all. Just sit still, or lie down, and let the long day you've just lived drift gently behind you. Let your shoulders drop a little lower. Let your breathing slow. And as you exhale, imagine yourself stepping backward away from the modern world, away from electric lights, engine noise, and the endless numbers running through your mind, traveling to a place very far away, very old, and very quiet. In front of you now, it's no longer the familiar room you were in before. Instead, you find yourself standing in a winter twilight, somewhere in medieval Europe. There are no clocks, no phone notifications, only the last light of day slowly retreating from low, straw-thatched rooftops huddled close together like small creatures seeking warmth. You stand there. You are there. If you enjoy slow, gentle historical stories like this, where history doesn't wake you up, but helps you fall into deeper sleep, then softly tap like share this story with anyone who could use a peaceful night, and subscribe to the channel so that each evening we can return together to the past, slower and warmer. And now, when you're ready, we begin to step very quietly into the medieval winter. The light doesn't shut off suddenly. It fades. The sun doesn't disappear. It simply pulls away, leaving behind a pale grey sky, low and heavy, as if winter itself is bending closer to the earth. The village before you is very small, not because it truly is small, but because the people here have long learned to live humbly beneath nature. The dirt roads beneath your feet are beginning to harden. The thin layer of daytime mud shifts into something colder, firmer, drier. Each step makes a sound so faint, not really a sound at all, but a sensation, as if the ground itself is listening to you. The cold touches your skin before you have time to think about it. Not harsh, not aggressive, just a long, slow, patient touch. It brushes across your cheeks where the skin is thinnest. It settles lightly on the backs of your hands. And when you breathe out, you see your breath appear faintly, then fade away like a whisper that doesn't need to be heard. The air carries a very particular scent. The smell of snow that hasn't fallen yet, but is very close. The smell of wet wood soaked by days of rain, and somewhere suspended in the air a thin trace of smoke. Not strong, not sharp, just enough to remind you that someone is here. You don't see them right away, but you feel their presence. A wooden door closing in the distance. Footsteps moving a little faster than usual. A low voice speaking quickly, then stopping, as if everyone knows night is coming and no one wants to say too much before winter fully settles in. The thatched roofs bow lower in the fading light. They don't stand tall with pride. They lean familiarly just as they have for generations. You stand in the middle of the village, and no one asks who you are. No one looks at you for long, because here at this hour everyone is thinking about the same thing: how to make it through the coming cold night. The cold now is no longer just a temperature. It begins to have a personality. It is there, silent, watching. Not pushing, not threatening, just waiting. You can feel it behind you, not as fear, but as a very gentle awareness, like knowing you should pull your coat a little closer, even though the wind hasn't picked up yet. No one says it out loud, but everyone knows. Winter has arrived, and it will stay for a long time. You don't need to move quickly. You don't need to understand anything more. Just remain still a little longer and feel this twilight closing slowly, like a large blanket being pulled up over the entire village. And as darkness begins to blend into the earthen walls, as the cold moves beyond the skin and seems to touch even your thoughts, we begin to realize together that this winter is not just weather, but a quiet presence, slowly drawing nearer, and that is where the next part of our story will begin. When the very last light of twilight has fully withdrawn from the village, you begin to notice something very small, yet undeniably real. The cold is no longer just air anymore. It is there, present, silent, like someone standing at the edge of a forest, neither stepping in nor walking away, only watching. You can't see it, but you know you're being watched. Not with eyes, but with something far older. A feeling your ancestors once knew well, the sense that nature is closer than usual. The cold is in no hurry. It doesn't need to be. It knows the night is long, and it knows humans are always the ones who must wait. It begins in the places you pay the least attention to: the back of your neck, the spaces between your fingers, the edges of your clothing where the fabric has thinned from many winters before. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't sting. It's just a very patient reminder. I am here. You pull your coat a little tighter, almost without thinking. not out of fear but because your body learned how to listen a very long time ago. In medieval times, people didn't speak of cold as a number. There was no below zero, no forecast. Cold was understood as a living being, something with will, with habits, and with memory. It returned every year on time, never forgetting, never forgiving. It knows this village. It knows every roof, every drafty corner, every wall that's thinner than the rest. And it begins to wander not with footsteps, but with tiny, nearly invisible currents of air slipping through loose doors, sliding beneath thatched roofs, brushing against packed earth, still holding a trace of daytime warmth. It feels as though it's testing each place. Not invading, just checking. Somewhere in the distance a dog barks, short, sharp, then silent again. Not because of a stranger, but because the air itself has changed. Even animals sense it. The cold doesn't need light to move. It prefers the dark because in darkness everything slows down, and when everything slows, the cold has time. Time is its ally. You stand still, and the feeling of being watched doesn't come from straight ahead, but from all around, from the rooftops above, from the ground beneath your feet, from the empty spaces between the houses. There is no place that is truly safe, only places that are slower. In this time, people don't fight winter. There is no concept of victory. They only try to live alongside it. Because the cold does not argue. It does not listen to prayers. It does not change for hope. It arrives, and it stays. You can feel its patience, a patience that is frightening in the gentlest possible way. It doesn't need to act. It only needs to exist. Every passing minute, every bit of warmth leaving the human body is confirmation that winter is doing exactly what it came to do. And strangely, within that silence, there is no panic, only a very deep acceptance. Medieval people grew up with this feeling. They slept with it, woke with it, and aged in its presence. The cold is like an uninvited guest, familiar, unwelcome, yet expected. No one greets it. No one drives it away. They simply make quiet room for it in their minds, allowing it to stay through the long winter season. You breathe in, and the cold air moves into your lungs, clean and dry. You breathe out, and warmth leaves your body, disappearing into the darkness. Each breath is a silent exchange with winter. No one wins, no one loses, only existence continues. And when the cold has passed through the entire village, when it has touched every door, every roof, every wall, it stops. Not because it is tired, but because it is time for humans to begin their part. In the thickened silence, you slowly notice the village changing its rhythm, footsteps moving faster, doors closing earlier, hands gathering small tasks before night fully settles in. And it is from this very moment when the cold stands still to observe that human life shifts into its familiar rhythm of survival. A rhythm that is slow, disciplined, and deeply human, preparing for the long night ahead. When the cold finally stops moving, when it stands somewhere at the edge of the village, quietly observing people begin their part. No one gives orders. There is no bell marking the hour. And yet everyone knows through a deep, instinctive feeling that there isn't much of the day left. You can sense the rhythm of life beginning to shift. Not faster in a panicked way, but tighter, more focused, like an old song sung every evening. No need to remember the words, the body already knows the timing. The men working in the fields turn back earlier than usual. Their shoulders are heavy not only from labor but from the knowledge that tonight will be cold. Their steps don't stretch conversations out. Just a few nods, a few familiar glances, enough to understand one another. The women of the village finish their final tasks outdoors. Cloth is wrung dry one last time. Buckets are turned upside down. Small tools are brought inside, not out of fear of losing them, but out of respect for the cold night ahead. Children, noisy during the day, grow quieter now. No one tells them to be silent. They've learned that when adults speak less, it's time to listen. You see doors beginning to close, not slammed shut, just pulled tighter, latched earlier. Each closing door forms a fragile boundary between inside and outside, not to stop winter, but to slow it down. Firewood is gathered into neat, modest stacks. No one takes more than what's needed for tonight because wood belongs to tomorrow as well and the day after. Everything has its measure. In medieval times, people didn't think far ahead in long-term plans. They thought in repeated rhythms. One day is enough for one day. One night is enough for one night. You feel a gentle urgency, not fear but respect for time. The fading light slows every movement. No one wants to stumble in the dark. No one wants to redo a task they already know how to do properly. A man pauses at his doorway, looking once more across the village, not to inspect but to make sure no one has been left behind. Here, survival is not an individual matter. You hear the sound of a wooden latch sliding into place dry solid. That sound doesn't mean shutting out the world. It means completion. Daytime noises disappear one by one. No more water being drawn. No more voices calling from afar. No more footsteps passing by. Silence doesn't arrive all at once. It thickens gradually like mist. You stand in the middle of the village, and it feels as though the entire space is breathing more slowly. Each house becomes its own small world, dark, modest, humble, but enough for the people inside. No one remains outdoors, not because it's dangerous, but because night is not meant for wandering. Night is for warmth, for retreat, for closeness. You recognize the familiarity of this moment even if you've never lived here, even though this was centuries ago. Because this rhythm, when the day closes, when people return to their small spaces, is something humans have always done in every era. The only difference is that here there is no electric light to stretch the evening longer, no reason to stay awake. Darkness is the signal. It needs no explanation. And within that silence there is no emptiness, only preparation. Preparation for a long night. Preparation for the cold to stay. Preparation for survival in the most ordinary way. You can feel that the entire village is doing the same thing together, even though each person is inside a different house. No need to see one another. No need to speak. Just knowing that everyone is keeping the same rhythm. And when the final door closes, when the village no longer moves outside, you realize the world hasn't disappeared, it has simply grown smaller. Smaller to keep warm. Smaller to endure. And in that moment, when everything is done, when the familiar urgency has settled, people begin to turn inward, not only inside their homes, but into a tighter, darker living space where the cold doesn't vanish but becomes just a little more bearable. And that is when you lower your head and step through a low doorway, crossing the threshold into the inner world of a medieval home. When the door has finally closed, when the sound of the wooden latch becomes the last sound of the day, something else begins to settle into that small space, something unseen yet always present. It isn't the cold. It isn't the darkness. It's belief. Not a grand belief. Not something to be explained or debated. Just small habits, very old ones, repeated across generations, enough to make people feel steadier as night arrives. You notice a small piece of wood hanging near the door. No careful carving. Just a smooth, worn fragment with a rough cord threaded through it. It doesn't protect in the modern sense of the word. It simply stays there, familiar as it always has. No one is entirely sure what it does, but no one ever takes it down. Because in a world where winter cannot be controlled, keeping something familiar is already enough. A woman returns a wooden bowl to its usual place. Always that spot. Near the hearth. Never anywhere else. Not because it's important, but because it has been there since before she was a child. Small habits like these, no one calls them belief. They are simply the way life is lived. In medieval times, people didn't need absolute faith. They didn't need certainty. They only needed the feeling that doing it this way makes the night easier to pass. Belief isn't light. It's more like a thin blanket. It doesn't take the cold away, but it makes the shivering gentler. You can feel it in the room. No one speaks of it. No one explains it. Just before sitting down, a hand briefly touches something familiar. Just before lying down, a very short whisper, not a plea but a greeting. Those whispers aren't sent upward to the sky. They turn inward toward the house, the family this night. Here, folklore isn't a story that's told. It's an action that's repeated. Repeated to create rhythm. Repeated to keep order in the mind. Repeated to know that no matter how long winter lasts, tonight is still like the night before. You begin to understand that the greatest comfort doesn't come from believing everything will be fine, but from knowing we've been through this before. Folk belief doesn't ask you to understand how it works. It only asks that you follow along slowly, just as everyone always has. And when everyone does the same thing, worry naturally shrinks. You can feel the early tension of the evening dissolve. Not because the cold disappears, but because the mind no longer faces it alone. Here, belief doesn't pull people away from reality. It helps them remain within it, without becoming exhausted. A small gesture, a small object, a small habit. They don't change the world, but they change the way people enter sleep. Movements grow slower still. The space becomes so familiar it no longer needs to be seen. Everything is where it belongs. And in that repetition there is a deep sense of safety, not safety because there is no danger, but safety because there is something to hold on to. Folk belief doesn't make people stronger. It makes them soft enough to rest. And when the final habits of the day are complete, when the small gestures have been performed just like every other night, the space inside the house begins to change. Not through light, not through warmth, but through the feeling that it's time to draw inward. It's time to move deeper inside, where the space is tighter, darker, and not warm but far more intimate. And from that quiet reassurance, people lower their heads just a little, pull their shoulders in just a little, and step through the low threshold of the house where comfort is not promised but survival is. And that is where our story will continue. After the final habits of the day, after the small gestures have been repeated enough for the mind to settle, people no longer linger at the doorway. Night does not wait. You lower your head slightly, not out of reverence, but because the doorway was built low. Medieval houses were not designed to welcome. They were designed to hold. You step over the wooden threshold, worn smooth at its center by countless feet before yours. The door closes behind you, and in that exact moment the outside world is cut off. Not abruptly, but decisively. Sound changes before temperature does. The wind no longer touches your ears. The village fades away. What remains are sounds that are very close, very human. The space inside is darker than you expected. Not deep darkness, but a kind of poor light, enough to know where you are, not enough to see everything clearly. The house is small, low, almost no space wasted. You can't stand upright for long. The low ceiling forces you to draw yourself in naturally, as if your body already understands that here humility is required. The air inside is not warm. It's just less cold. You feel that difference immediately, not as comfort but as relief. The cold outside is a vast presence, wandering, watching, slipping through everything. The cold inside this house is contained, held within 4 earthen walls. It doesn't disappear, but it is no longer free. You can smell the familiar scent of lived-in space, packed earth, old wood smoke that has settled over time. No longer sharp, only lingering like a memory. It isn't pleasant in a modern sense, but it's familiar. And familiarity alone is enough to help your body relax. You stand still for a moment. No one rushes you. No one speaks. Because entering this house is not something to hurry. It's a transition. Outside, people face winter. Inside, people face one another. The tight space pulls everything closer. You don't need to speak loudly. You don't need to look for long. The people here are used to sharing the same air, the same darkness, the same cold. The house isn't designed for privacy. There are no separate rooms, no distance. And strangely enough, that's what creates a sense of safety. You know that if something happens in the night, you won't be alone. Outside, the wind may change direction, snow may fall thicker, but inside this house everything has been gathered just enough. Not enough for comfort, only enough to endure. You feel the contrast clearly. Outside is open, cold, wide, and indifferent. Inside is enclosed, dark, small, and marked everywhere by human presence. No one calls this place home in the warm sense of the word. It promises no comfort. It promises only this: tonight you are here. And for people of that time, that promise is enough. You hear very small movements, fabric brushing against fabric, feet settling onto packed earth, a longer breath being released. The house seems to draw in just a little more, as if to keep everyone closer together. No one lights a lamp. There is nothing to light. The only faint glow comes from a low corner, not fire, yet just a slightly lighter shade of darkness. And in that space you begin to understand that this house was not built to fight winter with strength, but with acceptance. Acceptance of tightness. Acceptance of darkness. Acceptance of cold. In return, people have one another. And once you grow used to the darkness, once your eyes stop trying to make out every detail, you begin to notice different things: the thick earthen walls, the rough wooden posts, the materials placed not for beauty but to stand firm through many winters. In that moment, when the house is no longer unfamiliar but part of the rhythm of life, you begin to understand that everything here, from its shape and materials to its layout, is the result of a way of thinking shaped over a very long time. Not how to live comfortably, but how to survive. And that is when we will slowly begin to look around, to look deeper into these very walls, to understand why medieval houses took this form. A form born from winter, from scarcity, and from the quiet intelligence of generations that came before. Once your eyes have slowly adjusted to the darkness inside the small house, once you stop trying to distinguish every corner, you begin to feel the space not through sight but through your body. The walls are not straight, not smooth, not even. They are thick and heavy. You can place your hand against them and feel earth that has hardened over years, soil mixed with straw, pressed tight by human effort, once soft, once wet, once shaped by bare hands. These walls don't tell a story of beauty. They tell a story of endurance. The wooden frame is rough, unpolished. The beams curve slightly, following the natural shape of the trees they came from. Nothing here is forced to be straighter than it can be. In this place, architecture does not impose itself on nature. It accepts nature and learns how to live alongside it. The roof is low, layered, thick with thatch. Thatch does not last forever. It does not resist heavy rain. It does not resist fire. But thatch holds air, and air holds heat. You begin to notice that every material here has a very clear purpose. Nothing extra, nothing missing. Earthen walls release heat slowly. During the day they absorb what little warmth the sun offers. At night they give it back, slowly, sparingly. Not enough to warm the body, just enough to keep the cold from rushing in too fast. That is how life worked in medieval times. Not resisting, just slowing things down. You start to understand that this house was not built to be lived in, not in the way we understand today. It was built to survive. The tight space isn't because people didn't know how to build larger. Larger spaces lose heat faster, are harder to control, more dangerous. The low ceiling isn't from lack of materials, but because warm air needs to stay close to human bodies. Everything revolves around one simple question: how do we make it through the night? The strengths of this house are clear. It keeps what little there is heat, people, life close together. But its limits are just as real. There is no light, no privacy, no place to retreat. You cannot go anywhere else in this house. You are here, and you are here with others. This architecture does not allow escape from the community. It forces closeness, whether one wants it or not. And that is not cruelty. It is a choice. Because in a place where winter lasts, where cold is a patient presence, humans cannot live alone. These walls were raised by many hands, and they have been maintained across generations. Every crack is filled again. Every layer of thatch is replaced, not to renew but to continue. Architecture here reflects an ancient way of thinking, far from comfort yet close to nature. No attempt to create excess comfort. No wasted energy. No dreams of abundance, only a focus on what truly matters. You feel this truth through your own body. There is nowhere to stretch out fully, no corner that belongs only to you. And yet you don't feel as uncomfortable as you expected, because this space was never meant to please you. It was meant to keep you alive. In medieval times, architecture was not an academic discipline. It was collective memory. People built as their ancestors had built. They repaired as their ancestors had repaired, not out of tradition, but because other ways had already failed. You begin to see that this house is part of a long chain of adaptation. Every winter left behind a lesson, and those lessons were recorded not in writing, but in earth, wood, and straw. This house does not say, "I will protect you from winter." It only says, "I will be here with you during winter." And for people of that time, that was a very large promise. As you stand in this space long enough, it no longer feels cramped. It feels sufficient, enough for the number of people, enough for the amount of heat, enough for life. And within that sense of just enough, you begin to understand something essential. Every part of this house is meant to work together. The walls hold heat, the roof holds air, the small space keeps people close. But there is one thing more important than all of it, something architecture alone cannot create: a living source of heat. And when you begin to notice the low corner of the house, where old ash still lingers, where the space seems arranged with greater care, you understand that everything here revolves around a single thing: the fire. Not a bright fire, not a luxurious fire, but a weak, carefully guarded flame kept like a memory of warmth. And from that point, our story will slowly, quietly carry us into what comes next. Once your eyes have fully adjusted to the darkness inside the small earthen house, once the shapes of the walls no longer feel unfamiliar, you begin to notice that there is one thing here treated differently from everything else. It is not placed at the center. It is not displayed. It sits low, very low, close to the ground, as if it too wishes to hide. It is the fire, not a bright fire, not a cheerful dancing flame, just a faint red-orange trace nearly buried beneath a thick layer of grey ash. You have to look for a long time before you realize it is still alive. And once you do, you immediately understand in medieval times fire was not something to admire. Fire was property. Every piece of firewood was calculated. Every moment of stirring the flame carried risk. Lighting a fire was easy. Keeping it was the hard part. This flame is not meant to warm the house in any complete sense. It exists only to remind everyone that warmth is still there, very close, but never to be wasted. You can feel the caution surrounding that small corner. No one steps heavily. No one kicks ash by accident. There is no carelessness. Because if the fire dies completely, the cold will not wait for anyone. Here people do not burn fire to drive winter away. They keep fire only so winter does not move in too quickly. Beneath the grey ash lie embers glowing faintly red like a sleeping memory. A memory of daylight when the weak sun once warmed the ground. A memory of warmer seasons now gone. And that memory is guarded carefully the way one protects a promise. No one stirs the fire without real need. No one adds wood before the right moment. Hands move slowly, deliberately, as if even one unnecessary motion could become an irreversible mistake. You begin to understand that scarcity is not a state of panicked lack. It is a familiar condition, a continuous act of weighing, a rhythm of life in which everything is used at exactly the right measure, no more, no less. The fire follows the same rule. It is not the center of the house. It is what everything revolves around. People sit close, but not too close. They look, but not for long. They feel its presence, but do not demand from it. This flame promises no comfort. It promises only that tonight there is still a small trace of warmth to hold on to. And that is enough. You can smell old ash smoke that has settled into clothing, into hair, into human skin itself. The smell is no longer unpleasant. It becomes the smell of survival, a scent so familiar that simply breathing it tells the body it is as safe as it can possibly be on a winter night. The fire is not allowed to burn bright because light itself is a luxury. Light consumes wood. Light pulls heat away faster. Everything here follows the same logic: keep what you have for as long as possible. And because of this, the fire feels like an aging creature the entire household tends to. No one wants it to grow larger. They only want it not to die. This absolute caution does not create tension. On the contrary, it creates order. Everyone knows what to do. Everyone knows when the fire may be touched and when it must be left alone. No reminders are needed. No rules are spoken. It is knowledge passed quietly from one generation to the next, without writing, without ceremony. You realize that the fire does more than warm the space. It warms memory. It is proof that people have been here before, that they have endured nights just like this one, that they once sat around a small, fragile glow and waited for morning. In that weak light, there is no excitement, no great comfort, only a deep awareness that everyone present is helping to preserve something delicate together. And when you sit in that space long enough, when your eyes stop trying to distinguish color at all, you begin to realize that true warmth does not come from the fire. It comes from the fact that people are close enough that no one has to keep the fire alone. Within scarcity, humans learn to share even the smallest things. And once the flame has been stabilized, once the ash has been layered thick enough to protect the living embers beneath, the house seems to slip into another rhythm, slower still, lower still, where every movement is directed toward holding onto heat in the smallest possible ways, from the packed earth beneath bare feet to the silent stones lying nearby, ready to store what little warmth they can for the long night ahead. When the fire has been carefully covered with ash, when the red-orange embers are reduced to a slow, steady glow like a deep, quiet breath, you begin to realize that the warmth inside this house does not come from the fire alone. It comes from quieter things, lower things, things that are rarely noticed. You feel it through your feet as they rest on the packed earth floor, cold but not biting. A sensation that is hard to name, not warmth, yet no longer the empty, hostile cold of the outside world. The floor has been compressed by earth, by time, by countless footsteps of those who lived here before you. It is not smooth, not level, but it is solid. During the day, when a weak shaft of sunlight slips through the doorway, when the fire is briefly stirred, this earthen floor absorbs tiny traces of heat very slowly, like a patient living thing. And at night, when nearly all sources of warmth have faded, it releases that heat. Not much, not clearly, but just enough to keep the space from becoming truly harsh. You begin to notice that the stones placed near the hearth are not there by accident. They have been there a long time, heavy, grey, undecorated. By day they quietly draw warmth from the fire from the bodies seated nearby. By night, when a foot brushes against them, there is a faint warmth, subtle, real. No one talks about this. No one calls it technique or knowledge. But everyone knows. They know with their bodies. They know through experience repeated across many winters. Wisdom here does not live in words. It lives in arrangement, in where stones are placed, in how thick the floor is kept, in the understanding that heat does not need to be constantly created, but carefully preserved. You can feel that quiet intelligence filling the space. There are no great inventions, no dramatic breakthroughs, only small correct choices repeated until they become habit. This packed earth floor is not just for walking, it is part of the warming system. It slows the cold rising from the ground. It prevents the space from changing too suddenly. And because of this, even though the house is not warm, you do not feel attacked by the cold. You feel that it has been partially tamed. These stones, this floor would never be called comfortable by modern standards, but they create something deeper stability, a sense that the night will not grow worse than this, and that feeling alone is enough for the body to relax. You do not need to understand why stone holds heat. You only need to know that when your feet rest here, you do not shiver the way you would outside in the snow. Inherited wisdom does not require explanation. It exists because it has worked winter after winter, generation after generation. You begin to see that everything in this house works together: the weak flame, the thick earthen walls, the floor, the silent stones. Nothing functions alone. Nothing is wasted. And within that quiet cooperation, people are able to rest not in comfort but in reassurance. You notice that everyone inside the house moves very little. No one walks unnecessarily. No one changes position often. Because every movement stirs, the air releases precious heat. Human bodies, stone, earth, ash, everything is participating in a single effort to hold warmth for as long as possible. And when you sit in this space long enough, when you allow the faint warmth from the floor to rise slowly into you, you begin to understand that true warmth never comes from a single source. It comes from the sum of many small, correct, humble things. And at that moment, when everything has settled, when heat has been stored in the lowest, quietest places, you begin to sense another presence that has not given up, one that never rests, one that searches constantly for a way in, through every crack, every tiny gap, the wind. And that is when our story drifts toward the next silent confrontation, where people endlessly seal, patch, and shield, trying to keep what little they have from being carried away into the long night. When that faint warmth has finally been held within the packed earth and the low stones, when the house seems to settle into the slow breathing rhythm of the night, there is still one thing that refuses to stay still. It isn't as violent as a storm. It isn't as loud as rain, but it is more patient than anything else. The wind. You can't see it, but you know it's there, searching for a way in. It doesn't charge straight at the house. It doesn't slam doors. It doesn't challenge openly. It circles. It lowers itself. It slips through the smallest gaps, places the eye ignores, places the hand never quite reaches. A thin ribbon of cold brushes past your ankle, so light you only notice it after it's already gone. Not enough to make you flinch, but enough to remind you that winter is still knocking in its own quiet way. In medieval times, wind was not something you could completely stop. People didn't talk about blocking wind. They talked about slowing it. And you see that logic in every small detail of this house. Old cloth hangs near the doorway, not for decoration but to break airflow. Straw is packed into wall seams, not sealed tight but enough to keep the wind from moving freely. Mud is pressed into old cracks, uneven and rough, but clear evidence that someone once felt that same cold stream and did what needed to be done. This work never truly ends. Wind always finds new paths. When one gap is sealed, another appears. When cloth grows thick enough, the wind changes direction. It behaves like a tireless wanderer, never aiming for a quick victory, only to stay long enough to matter. You begin to sense the human persistence in this quiet confrontation. There is no anger, no feeling of defeat, only the acceptance that each day requires a small effort. Each winter leaves behind a few more cracks, and each crack is patched with whatever is available. Old cloth, dry, straw, wet mud. These simple materials don't create absolute security, but they create familiarity. Your body learns that wind is not an enemy to be conquered, but a condition to adapt to. When a draft whistles softly through a gap, no one startles. People simply shift closer together. When a cold stream slides across someone's back, no one jumps up to fix it immediately. They wait. They watch to see if the wind continues, to see if it's a permanent path or just a passing moment. That patience isn't laziness. It's experience. Not every draft deserves a response, only the ones that return again and again. You realize this is a conflict without sound, without climax, without an ending. Every action is small. Every response is measured. No one expects the house to ever be completely windproof. That would be impossible. They only hope the wind will slow, weaken, disperse before it reaches the heart of the living space. Because of this, the house feels like a living body, constantly adjusting, constantly responding to its surroundings. When the wind strengthens, people draw inward. When it fades, everything settles again. You feel a very mild tension in the air, not the tension of fear, but the tension of sustained attention. A low, steady awareness that doesn't exhaust you. Instead, it makes you feel held within a system that has known this rhythm for a very long time. The wind may find its way in, but it finds no panic, no emptiness. Every gap carries the mark of someone who stood there before you. Every scrap of cloth, every bundle of straw, every layer of dried mud is a quiet answer to the same question, repeated across generations: how to get through this night. And when you sit long enough in that house, when you allow the small drafts to pass without resistance, you begin to feel that even the wind grows tired. It doesn't vanish, but it blends into the shared breathing of the space. No longer a clear intruder, just another part of the night. And it is in that moment, when this silent struggle has briefly settled, when the wind is no longer the main concern, that people begin the most important work of the winter night, rearranging what remains of their living space, drawing every trace of warmth closer together, preparing for the moment of lying down, where sleep is no longer an individual rest, but a shared strategy of survival for the entire community. When the wind finally stops searching so persistently, when the drafts are accepted as an unavoidable part of the night, the people inside the small house begin the most familiar task of all, one repeated through countless winters: arranging the sleeping space. No one rushes. No one delays. This is not work that requires creativity, but work that requires correctness. You begin to notice that sleeping places are never set against the walls. Walls hold cold. Walls touch the night outside directly. So human bodies are drawn closer to the center of the house, where drafts are weakest, where stored heat from the earth floor, from the stones, from the remaining ash, can gather into a more stable zone. No one explains this. Everyone simply does it. Sleeping spots are chosen not for comfort, but for familiarity. Familiarity with laying down there, with the smell of earth smoke and old fabric, with the close distance between bodies. You sense that the sleeping space is not separate. It isn't created with curtains or partitions. It is only a temporary arrangement of familiar objects, just enough for the body to understand that it is time to rest. Old animal hides and thick layers of cloth are spread directly on the ground. There are no raised beds, no thick mattresses. The lower the better, because heat does not rise, and the body must stay close to where warmth is stored. As you lower yourself down, you feel the difference immediately. Not clearly warmer, but steadier. This space has no privacy, no room for being alone. Everyone sleeps within reach of one another, within one another's breathing. You hear the soft rustle of fabric, familiar sighs, not from exhaustion but from bodies finishing their day. No one turns away. No one lies apart. Because in winter, separation is a risk. You begin to understand that closeness here does not mean intimacy in a modern sense. It means survival. Heat from one body reaches another without effort, just by being close enough. No one demands personal comfort. No one searches for a perfect position, only a position that can be held for a long time. The sleeping space slowly grows quieter, not because people force themselves to be silent, but because there is no longer any reason to speak. The day is finished. Night has arrived. Everything necessary has been placed where it belongs. You feel the familiarity of this moment, even if you have never lived here, because the human body in every era understands this. When space has been reduced, when warmth has been gathered, when there is nothing left to do, lying down becomes the most reasonable action. This sleeping space promises no pleasant dreams. It promises only that the body will not face the night alone, and that promise is enough for you to relax. Final movements slow further. An arm shifts a little closer. A piece of cloth is pulled slightly higher. No one adjusts again and again, because every movement disturbs warm air that has been preserved for a long time. Frugality here is not only for fire and wood, but for movement itself. You lie still, sensing the warmth of others nearby, not hot, not obvious, but real. The sleeping space has no clear boundary. It blends into the living space. And that blending allows the mind to stop being alert. Nothing unexpected will happen. Everything has been prepared. You do not need to think about tomorrow. At this moment, the only important thing is to let the night pass. And as your body begins to match the shared rhythm of breathing, as the remaining sounds in the house become steady and repetitive, you realize that sleep here is not an individual state, it is a collective act, a silent agreement that everyone will rest together, keep warmth together, wait for morning together. And within this simple arrangement, when everyone has lain down in the right place, at the right time, at the right distance, you begin to slip deeper into the night, where sleep is no longer just rest, but a very ancient, very human, very peaceful strategy for survival, carrying the story forward to its most essential moment when people sleep not alone but as a single body, sharing warmth, breath, and existence through the long winter night. When everyone has finally lain down, when the sleeping space has been drawn in just enough, a very old order begins to form on its own, without instruction, without agreement. You don't hear anyone saying where to lie, yet every body knows its place. The stronger adults settle toward the outside, closer to the walls, nearer to the paths where cold air may still creep in, not because they were chosen, but because they are used to it. Their shoulders are broader, their backs tolerate cold better, and they know their bodies lose heat more slowly than others. They lie there with their backs turned outward, forming a soft human barrier without drama, without sacrifice, simply doing what has been done for a very long time. In the center, children are placed in the most stable space. Not because they are fragile in a sentimental way, but because they need steadier warmth and calmer breathing. You can feel the care in how each body is positioned, not with hands but with awareness. A gap is gently filled. A piece of cloth is drawn closer. An arm settles into the right place. Everything happens slowly, naturally, as if the entire house is exhaling together after a long day. No one holds anyone in a romantic sense, but no one lies far apart. Warmth is not kept private. It flows from one body to another without permission, without gratitude. Your body begins to notice the change clearly. There are no longer isolated cold spots, no longer the sense of winter pressing in from all sides. Instead, there is a single field of warmth, not hot, not obvious, but even. You cannot tell exactly whose warmth it is, and it doesn't matter. In this collective sleep, individuality fades, personal boundaries loosen. Each breath blends into the shared rhythm. Every small movement is instinctively measured not by thought but by bodily memory. No one turns sharply, no one stretches too far. Every motion affects someone else, and that gentle awareness makes the space calmer. You hear breathing grow steadier, not perfectly synchronized but close enough to feel grounded. There are deep, slow breaths from those accustomed to cold nights. There are shorter breaths from children, gradually slowing as they are surrounded. No lullabies are needed. No stories are told. The presence of others is an ancient lullaby in itself. In medieval life, communal sleep was not considered inconvenient. It was a strategy and efficient use of the most reliable resource they had, their own bodies. Warmth is the only thing that can be produced continuously through the night, as long as people remain close. And so sleep here is not a retreat from the world, but an active act of survival. You begin to feel a sense of safety that does not come from locked doors, but from knowing that if you wake in the night, someone will be right beside you. No need to call out, no need to sit up, just knowing. That knowledge allows the mind to loosen deeply. You no longer listen for the wind. You no longer track every small sound. Those tasks have been quietly shared among everyone sleeping with you. No one is standing guard, yet no one is completely unprotected. It is a rare state, resting in the presence of others. You realize that the most valuable warmth in this house does not come from firestone or earthen walls. It comes from people choosing to remain close through the night, without hiding, without separation. The stronger ones do not announce that they will block the cold. Children do not need to be told they are safest in the center. Everything unfolds in silence, guided by instinct refined across generations. And it is that silence that gives this moment its depth. Your body begins to feel heavier, not from exhaustion, but because it no longer has to hold itself tense. Shoulders soften, jaw loosens, breath lengthens. You don't need a perfect position. Any position will do as long as it doesn't break this closeness. No one turns fully away. No one lies apart. In collective sleep, turning away is a form of withdrawal, and winter nights do not encourage that. You feel warmth spreading slowly, very slowly, through ordinary points of contact: back, hip, shoulder. There is no moment of sudden comfort, no clear realization of now it's warm, only a quiet process in which cold simply stops demanding attention. And when cold is no longer noticed, the mind begins to drift. The last thoughts of the day are not held onto. No one tries to remember them. No one tries to forget them. They dissolve on their own like breath dissolving into shared air. Sleep here has no clear boundary between one person and another. It is like entering warm water together, sinking, staying still, waiting for morning. And in that state, you are no longer an individual sleeping in a strange medieval house. You are simply part of a group of people doing what humans have always done since very ancient times, lying close together to survive a cold night. When the shared breathing has fully settled, when all movement has faded, when the space is filled only with small, steady sounds, you begin to understand that the true climax of the winter night is not struggle, but the moment when people stop struggling and begin to trust one another. And from that quiet trust, when the body has fully let go, when sleep has grown deep enough to release vigilance, the night continues lighter, calmer, carrying us toward another deeper layer of the story, where not only humans, but the animals, who share the same roof, also play their part in holding warmth through the long winter ahead. When collective sleep has settled in, when the breathing of the people lying close together becomes steady and deep, you begin to notice something subtle, something that didn't require attention before. Beneath the cold, packed earth, beneath the stones that have stored the last traces of the day's warmth, another rhythm of life continues. Not loud, not hurried, just slow, heavy, steady sounds rising from below the floor, a long, unhurried exhale, the weighty shift of a body adjusting, a repeated chewing motion, mindless and constant. These are the livestock, animals living under the same roof as humans, not in the same room but directly beneath them, separate yet deeply connected. In medieval life, this was not unusual. It was part of the way things were done. Cows, sheep, goats, sometimes pigs, were brought into the lower space, close to the ground, where they could stand through the night, not out of kindness, not for convenience, but for warmth. A steady, reliable warmth, one that never goes out like fire. Large animal bodies generate heat continuously, slowly, and that heat rises just as slowly, through earth, through stone, through air, spreading upward into the sleeping space above. You don't feel it as a clear wave of warmth. You simply notice that the cold no longer advances, that the floor does not grow colder than it was when you lay down, that the night seems to pause at a level the body can endure. The animals do not know they are helping humans. They are simply doing what they always do, breathing, standing, chewing, existing. And that existence itself becomes part of the shared system of survival. You hear the sounds below as a steady background, not noises that demand attention, but a bass rhythm like distant waves or very light rain. These sounds don't wake you. They soothe you, because the human mind for a very long time has learned to sleep alongside living sounds like these. Here people do not live apart from nature. They live with it, even in sleep. Livestock are not distant property locked away. They are part of the house, part of the night, part of the shared warmth. You can detect a faint animal scent mixed with earth smoke and old fabric. Not strong, not unpleasant, just a sign that life is present. And to people of that time, the smell of life was far preferable to the smell of empty cold. No one complains about this. No one calls it inconvenient, because the alternative is colder, lonelier, and more dangerous. Here, humans and animals coexist in a very direct way. Humans give them shelter through the night. Animals give humans warmth. There is no romance in it, no excess emotion, just a quiet exchange repeated every night throughout the winter. You begin to realize that this house does not hold humans alone. It is a small ecosystem. Each layer, each level has its role. Humans above, animals below, earth and stone between them, all working together to slow the escape of heat, all working together to slow winter itself. The rhythmic sounds from below allow your mind to sink deeper. They do not change. They do not surprise. They do not rise or fall. And it is precisely that repetition that creates a very ancient sense of safety. You do not need to look. You do not need to check. You know everything is still in place. The animals are there. Warmth is being produced. The night is moving forward. You don't need to think about it. Knowing is enough. And in collective sleep, knowing is always enough. You begin to feel that the most valuable warmth in this house does not come from a single source. It comes from the combination of many ordinary things: human bodies, animal bodies, earth, stone, ash, cloth. None of them is sufficient alone, but together they create a zone of safety just enough. No excess, no waste, only enough to last through the night. In medieval times, people did not try to separate themselves from nature when they slept. They brought nature into the house, placed it directly beneath their feet, listened to it breathe, listened to it live, And that made sleep deeper because people no longer felt abandoned in the night. When you lie still long enough, when the sounds below become part of the shared breathing rhythm, you no longer distinguish between the breath of the person beside you and the life rhythm of the animals beneath the floor. Everything blends into a low, steady foundation difficult to separate. Within that foundation, your mind fully releases. No vigilance, no preparation. The night has been shared, warmth has been gathered, life has been placed where it belongs. And when everything has stabilized enough to no longer demand attention, when sleep has grown deep enough that individual details fade, the story slowly moves on to another layer of protection, closer to your body, still where the worn rough layers of old clothing carrying the scent of smoke and time become the final barrier between human skin and the long winter night. When everything inside the house has settled, when warmth from human bodies, animals, earth, and stone has merged into a single even foundation, you begin to feel more clearly the closest layer of protection you have. Not the earthen walls, not the thatched roof, but the clothes you are wearing. In medieval times, clothing was not something to remove before sleep. People slept in exactly what they had worn throughout the long day, not out of laziness, but because it was the most reasonable choice. Each layer of fabric was a barrier. Each patch was a memory of a past winter. Coarse wool, thick and heavy, not soft by modern standards, but excellent at trapping air. It didn't need to be beautiful. It only needed to be familiar. You feel the weight of the clothing on your body. It is not light. It fits close, not shaped, not flattering, but it creates a very clear sensation of being enclosed. The layers are not arranged to be easy to remove. They are arranged to hold warmth in. You do not take off your outer garment. You do not remove inner layers. You only adjust them slightly. Because every layer removed is warmth lost. Here, clothing is not a personal item in the private sense. It is part of the shared system of heat retention. You begin to understand that clothing in this time functions like a movable wall. It travels with you. It surrounds you. It replaces what the house itself cannot provide. When you lie down, the fabric between your body and the earth is not thick, but it is enough to slow the cold. And when you lie close to others, the layers of clothing touch, overlap, and create a more sealed, more stable pocket of air. You notice the familiar smell, smoke that has settled into the fabric over many days. Dried sweat, not sharp, not new. The scent is not pleasant in the way perfume is, but it carries a deep sense of familiarity. This is the smell of life, the smell of labor, the smell of days that ended safely. And for the human body, a familiar smell is a powerful signal that vigilance is no longer needed. You do not change clothes to be clean. You keep what your body has already accepted. The patches on the garments are not hidden. They are visible, rough reminders that the fabric once tore, once weakened, and was repaired to continue. Every patch represents a decision not to discard, not to replace, not to waste. Clothing here is not made for a single season. It is worn for many years, and because of that it carries a history that lies very close to the skin. As you curl slightly inward, the thicker layers gather around the chest, the back, the belly, places where heat matters most. No one teaches this. The body already knows. Less vital areas can tolerate cold. Essential areas are protected more carefully. Clothing here does not offer comfort. It offers sufficiency. Enough to stop shivering. Enough to avoid waking in the night. Enough to stand again in the morning. And that sense of enough allows the mind to settle. You no longer think about what you are wearing. There are no choices, no comparisons. Only one state remains being held. In the collective sleeping space, these worn layers of clothing brush softly against one another, making no loud sound. They are like soft walls placed side by side, slowing the escape of warmth. You begin to feel that safety does not come from having many things, but from everything being exactly where it belongs. Clothing here does not separate you from others. It allows you to stay close to others without losing heat. And in the long winter night, that matters more than anything else. You do not remove the final layer before sleeping. You keep it like keeping a piece of the day, a piece of labor, a piece of the outside world, so the body does not feel abandoned in the dark. In medieval life, sleep was not a complete separation from living. It was a slower, lower continuation of it, and clothing was the bridge. When you lie still long enough, when the fabric no longer feels heavy, when the familiar scent becomes background, you begin to forget the boundary between body and space. You no longer count layers. You only know that you are being held shielded, allowed to remain still. Safety no longer needs to be confirmed by thought. It is felt directly through the skin, through the breath, through the slowing heartbeat. And when every layer of protection has settled into place, The earthen walls, the thatched roof, the fire, the stones, the people, the animals, and finally the clothing pressed close to your body. The space no longer needs anything more. The night has been fully prepared. Everything that can hold warmth has been positioned. Everything that can slow winter has been placed correctly. And in that complete state, when there is nothing left to adjust, when the body no longer needs to respond, you begin to listen to what remains very distant, very small, very steady sounds of the night, where sound is no longer a sign of danger, but becomes the final gentle rhythm that carries you deeper, into sleep where all the noises of the night quietly arrange themselves into a slow, soft, familiar foundation. When every layer of protection has settled into place, when the space no longer needs anything more to hold warmth, what becomes most noticeable is no longer what you see, but what you hear. Not loud sounds, not anything that demands attention, just very small, very steady, very familiar noises that rise once everything else has grown quiet. You hear the old wood of the house softly creak, not cracking, not breaking, just contracting slowly and deeply as the cold outside presses against aged beams. That sound carries no warning. It feels like the house exhaling a natural adjustment, a reminder that this place is still alive, still adapting to the winter night. The creaks are uneven but familiar. They return every winter, and because of that, they don't startle anyone. They simply confirm that things are unfolding exactly as they always have. A little farther out, you hear the wind, not strong, not forceful, just a long, faint whistle, slipping past cracks that have been sealed just enough. The sound does not rush into the house. It is slowed, bent, softened. The wind is no longer searching for entry. It becomes a low background tone like the memory of distant waves. No one listens to it with concern anymore. It has become part of the night, no longer requiring a response. And closer than anything else is breathing, not only your own, but the breathing of those beside you. Different rhythms at first, gradually finding a shared range. Some breaths are deep and long, slow with experience. Others are shorter, lighter, but they too begin to settle. No one tries to breathe together, but when bodies are close, breath adjusts on its own. You hear the soft breathing of someone next to you, barely able to tell inhale from exhale. It doesn't intrude, it reassures, because in the dark another person's breathing is proof that you are not alone. Deeper still, almost blending into the ground itself, are the slow sounds of animals beneath the floor. A heavy shift of weight, the steady rhythm of chewing a large, low breath unlike any human breath. These sounds repeat without climax, without variation, and it is precisely that repetition that allows the mind to let go. When nothing new happens, the human brain stops tracking. Individual sounds dissolve into a single thick, low, even foundation. Wood creaks, wind whispers. Breathing continues. Again, and again, and again. No clear beginning, no clear end. Within that repetition, thought loses its place. You no longer need to remember where you are. You no longer need to imagine anything else. Sound does the work for consciousness. Each small noise confirms that everything is fine. Nothing needs fixing. Nothing needs doing. The day has passed. The night is holding what remains. You feel your body grow heavier. Not from exhaustion, but because it no longer has to stay braced. Shoulders drop, neck softens, jaw releases. Your breath lengthens on its own, slower, deeper, without effort. No one tells you to sleep. No one counts. No one urges. Sleep arrives as the most reasonable outcome, when every sound is saying the same thing. Stay still. Leave things as they are. Rest. In medieval life, night was not an empty space to be filled with thought. It was a space meant to be listened to, and people who lived through long winters learned to let sound carry them through the night rather than resisting it. You hear the wood shift once more, softly, familiarly. You don't open your eyes. You don't need to check. You know the house is simply adjusting again. Outside, the wind may change direction, but it alters the soundscape only slightly. Not enough to pull you back, not enough to break the rhythm. Everything continues to repeat, and within that repetition, time loses meaning. There is no before, no after. Only a long, slow, safe present. You no longer think about morning. You no longer think about winter. You no longer think about the story, because now the story no longer needs to be told. It has done its work. It has brought you here to a place where sound alone is enough to hold you. And when your breathing has fully merged with the shared rhythm, when the sounds of the night are no longer heard as separate things but as a single, gentle flow, there is nothing left for you to do. You can let your eyelids feel heavy even though they have been closed for a long time. You can allow the last thought to dissolve the way breath dissolves into the shared air of the old house. The night asks nothing of you. It simply continues. And in that quiet continuation you drift deeper to where sound is no longer noticed, only the feeling of being held sheltered at rest. And when the last sound you are aware of is your own breath, slow and steady, the story softly steps toward its ending, into a place where there is no sound left to listen to, only a deep, gentle stillness closing the long winter night with one final, unhurried exhale. At some point in the night, when all sounds have settled deep enough, when everyone's breathing has blended into a single, steady, underlying rhythm, you begin to realize something that doesn't need to be said aloud. The fire is gone. Not because it just went out. There was no final flare of red, no soft collapse of ash. It faded into silence long ago, long enough that no one expects it to return tonight. In the poorest homes there isn't even ash left to hold. No glowing embers, no faint orange memory beneath grey. Only darkness. And that truth doesn't arrive as a shock. It has been there since the beginning of the night. It simply becomes clearer once everything else has fallen silent. The darkness now is not something to see, it is something to feel. You no longer see the shape of the house. You don't see the walls. You don't see the ceiling. You don't see the people beside you. But you know they are there, through breath, through the faint weight of an arm resting against fabric, through the sense that this space is not empty. When there is no fire, everything becomes as simple as it can possibly be. There is no light to distinguish shapes, no visual anchor to hold on to, and so the body is forced to rely on deeper things. In the poorest medieval households, fire was a luxury that could not always be kept. Wood ran out. Forests were far. Or simply that day there was nothing left to burn. There was no choice. When the fire was gone, people did not wait for it to return. They accepted that this night would be different, colder, darker, quieter, but not impossible to endure. You feel the difference in the space very clearly. The cold does not surge suddenly. It simply becomes more honest. No longer slowed by ash or embers, it moves closer but without aggression. It is there present like a natural condition that cannot be negotiated. In complete darkness you hear breathing more clearly. You hear the soft brushing of fabric. You hear your own body. Without fire, without light, humans become the only point of reference. And because of that, the distance between bodies seems to shrink just a little more. No one speaks of it, but everyone feels it. Someone turns closer. An arm rests nearer. A piece of cloth is pulled higher, not to block light, but to keep warmth. Fear in a night without fire is real. Not panic, but a clear awareness that everything is more fragile. That if something happened, there would be no light to see. That if someone woke, they would meet darkness first. But what matters is this, that fear does not stand alone. It is shared. And when fear is shared, it no longer belongs to any one person. It becomes a collective state carried together, each person holding only a small part. You realize that in complete darkness people cannot keep distance. Privacy stops being relevant. There are no corners, no clear boundaries. But instead of discomfort, this creates a deep sense of reassurance. Because on a cold night without fire, the greatest danger is not losing warmth. It is being alone. And here, no one is alone. You know that if you shiver, someone else will feel it. If you shift, another movement will answer. No questions needed. No words exchanged. Presence is enough. In medieval life, darkness was not treated as an enemy. People lived with it, slept with it, learned not to panic when they could see nothing. Because darkness does not kill people. Isolation does. When there is no fire, all attention turns toward the community. Who lies where? Who is near whom? Who needs more shelter? The stronger naturally become the outer layer. No assignment. No instruction. Their bodies find the position. Children are drawn inward. No reminders needed. This is not heroism. It is survival reflex. You feel that warmth now no longer comes from a single source. It comes from many very small, very steady sources. Each body gives off a little. And together those small amounts create a zone that can be endured. Not warm, not comfortable, but enough. Enough to stop uncontrolled shivering. Enough to keep breath steady. Enough to prevent waking from cold. In darkness, time moves differently. There is no light to guess the hour, no changing sound to mark progress, only breath and heartbeat. And as those rhythms slow, time seems to stretch without pressure. There may be a fragile moment when your mind briefly wonders whether morning will come. Not as terror, just a passing thought. And as quickly as it appears, it dissolves. Because no one in this house is awake to worry. They have slept through nights like this before, many times. Many winters. And each time morning came not by luck but because they learned how to pass the night by staying together. In a house without fire, darkness does not take the shape of danger. It takes the shape of shared quiet. You do not need to open your eyes. You do not need to confirm anything. You simply remain still. Your breathing finds the rhythm of others. Your body finds a position that no longer needs adjusting. And within that stability, fear does not vanish, but it shrinks. It is no longer the center. The center is closeness. The knowledge that others are enduring with you. When there is no fire, people do not dream of warmth. They dream of continuation, of the night passing, of morning arriving slowly. And what is remarkable is this: in those poorest houses, sleep is not an escape. It is a quiet act of courage. The courage to lie down with nothing but the warmth of others. The courage to close one's eyes without light for reassurance. The courage to trust that this small, tired community is still enough to carry everyone through the night. You sense that at the very bottom of scarcity, one thing cannot be taken away: the presence of another human being. And that is what keeps this moment, though cold and dark, from becoming hopeless. It becomes real, human, and peaceful in a way that is hard to name. When your body has accepted the darkness, when your breath has fully merged into the shared rhythm, when you no longer expect the fire to return, you no longer need to stay alert. The night does not ask that of you. It simply continues slowly and steadily, carrying everyone in the house along with it. And from that lowest point, when there is no fire to hold on to, when all warmth comes from people, something essential becomes clear without words. Humans have never lived alone. Even in the deepest darkness, what holds them is not material things but connection. And in that quiet realization, when there is no more struggle and only togetherness remains, the story opens into its final movement, where the night is no longer a trial but a familiar, stable cycle, gentle enough for the mind to release completely and drift into sleep that is deep, very deep, and very still. When the night has gone deep enough, when there is no fire left to wait for, when darkness has become so familiar, it no longer needs a name. You no longer have to struggle. There is nothing left to overcome, no test waiting ahead, only a quiet, steady state where body and space have reached their final agreement for the night. You no longer think of the cold as something approaching. It has been here all along, and it is no longer the center. What stands at the center now is stability, the sense that everything is repeating exactly as it has repeated through countless nights before. Humans have never lived alone. Not on nights like these. In the Middle Ages, as in every era before electric light pushed back, the dark sleep was never a solitary act. It was always communal, a shared rhythm, a quiet agreement that everyone would remain still together, hold warmth together, let the night pass without constant vigilance. You are lying here not because you are strong, but because you are not alone. And that truth allows your body to soften naturally, without persuasion. You can feel the repetition of everything. Not repetition as boredom, but repetition as a safe circle. This night is like the night before, and the night before was like many others. Not because nothing changes, but because the most important things remain the same. People lie close. Warmth is shared. Darkness comes and goes. That repetition does not tire the mind. It reassures it. The human brain finds safety in what is familiar. When there are no surprises, no disruptions, no demands to react, the mind allows the body to sink deeper into rest. You no longer need to think about history. You don't need to remember that this is the Middle Ages. You don't need to distinguish yourself from the people who lived here centuries ago. At this moment, time no longer matters. The human body responds the same way to cold, to darkness, to the presence of others. Your breath slows in the same way theirs once did. Your heartbeat steadies as theirs once did. No thought required, no comparison needed, just a long continuation of the same human experience. You sense the shared warmth in an abstract way, not as a specific source, not as a clear point of heat. It feels like a pocket of air held in place by many bodies, many layers of protection, many small decisions made long before this moment. That warmth does not move, it does not flare, it simply remains. And once it has remained long enough, your body stops searching, stops adjusting, stops reacting. You no longer need to curl inward. You no longer need to stretch out. The position you are in has become the final position of the night, not perfect but sufficient. In medieval life, people did not seek perfect comfort in sleep. They sought continuation, a night fully passed, a morning they could rise into, and because the goal was that simple sleep was not burdened with expectation, there was no pressure to sleep well, no pressure to dream pleasantly, just sleep. And sleep comes more easily when it is not required to be perfect. You feel that the night is now holding itself. No intervention needed, no supervision required. Sounds have settled, movements have ceased. The space has stabilized into a state that no longer changes, and within that stability, time is no longer experienced as movement. It feels like a still surface of water without new ripples. Awareness stops drifting through thoughts and begins to rest. And when awareness rests long enough, deep sleep opens quietly without announcement. You do not need to understand the message of this story. It was not created for you to remember. It does not ask you to extract a lesson. It only wants your body to feel what humans have always felt when they lived close together in harsh conditions, that the most valuable warmth is not found in material things, not in fire, not in thick walls, not in new clothing. It is found in not having to endure alone. And when you do not endure alone, everything else becomes easier. You may notice that your breathing is no longer consciously even. It has found its own rhythm, perhaps slower, perhaps deeper, but certainly lighter. There is no lingering tension in the chest, no tightness in the belly. Each exhale feels like a small release. Nothing specific needs to be let go. Only the need to control. The night is doing its work. You do not need to do more. The repetition of night and day has given humans a deep sense of stability across time. In the Middle Ages, no matter how uncertain life was, no matter how harsh winter became, one thing always returned: morning. Not a brilliant morning, just enough light to see one another, enough to begin again. And because people knew morning would come, they allowed themselves to sleep, not from certainty but from trust in repetition that had occurred too many times to doubt. You are lying here now in another era, in another world, yet your body responds the same way. When things are stable enough, it allows sleep. No reason needed, no guarantee required, only the feeling that this night resembles other nights that ended safely. And that feeling is here, clear, gentle, sufficient. Nothing needs to conclude. The story does not end with a full stop. It simply grows smaller, like the last sound of an old house when the wood has finished settling, like the wind moving a little farther away, like breath becoming so deep that it is no longer heard. Stillness does not arrive suddenly. It arrives by removing one thing at a time until there is nothing left that asks for attention. You do not need to try to sleep. You do not need to stay awake. You only need to remain in this state a little longer. Everything has been prepared long before now, by earthen walls, stone floors, human and animal warmth habits repeated across generations. All of it has led to this moment where there are no more questions to answer. And if there is a single message left in this quiet settling, it is not a sentence. It is a feeling that humans have always found ways to stay together, to adapt, to slow down when necessary. And in that slowing down, they found enough peace to sleep. Not the sleep of escape, but the sleep of trust. You can let the final thought drift past without holding it. You can allow your eyelids to grow heavier without checking whether they are closed. You can let your body sink deeper into the familiar surface that has supported so many before you. Nothing is waiting to be solved. Nothing is being missed. The night is complete in its own way. And when you breathe out once more, slowly, gently, as if setting down a weight you have carried all day, you do not need to follow where that breath goes. It dissolves into the shared air. It becomes part of the wide, quiet stillness around you. There is no clear boundary between you and the world now. Only the soft presence of being here, being held, being at rest. The story does not end. It simply stops being told. And in that light space sleep arrives, uninvited, unnamed, just as it always has when humans allow themselves to trust that this night too will pass slowly, safely, and warm enough. When the story has finally closed, when the images of medieval winter nights slowly dissolve into quiet darkness, what remains is not the cold and not the lack of comfort. What remains is something deeply familiar, deeply old, yet often forgotten in modern life. Humans have always known how to slow down in order to survive, and how to stay close in order to rest. The poor farmers of centuries past had no heating systems, no modern conveniences, no abundance of choice, but they possessed something modern people sometimes lose amid comfort and excess, an understanding that sleep is not a separation from the world but a continuation of communal life. The most important lesson here is not about techniques for staying warm but about attitude. When conditions are harsh and dreaming is a luxury, people return to foundational values: simplicity, connection, and adaptation. They did not try to turn winter into summer. They did not fight nature with force. They listened to it, accepted its rhythm, and adjusted themselves just enough. That sense of enough allowed their bodies to feel safe enough to sleep, and when the body feels safe, the mind can finally rest. In the modern world where lights never fully turn off and noise rarely stops, many of us struggle to sleep not because we are too cold or too hungry, but because we are too lonely, too tense, too full of thought. The story of medieval winter nights reminds us that sleep does not need to be perfect. It does not need absolute silence. It does not need strict control. Sleep only needs a feeling of safety. And that sense of safety across all of human history has always been tied to the presence of others, to familiar rhythms, to repetition and stability. One gentle but profound message of this story is that humans were not made to sleep alone in anxiety. We evolved to rest in groups surrounded by familiar sounds and nearby breathing. Even today, when each of us may have our own room, our own bed, our own private space, our bodies still carry the ancient memory of being held, of sharing space, of resting together. When you listen to stories like this, what helps you sleep may not be the historical information at all, but the feeling of returning to a pace of life where nothing demands too much from you. This story does not glorify hardship. It does not claim that scarcity is good. It simply reminds us that humans are remarkably adaptable and that within adaptation they developed a quiet, gentle intelligence, knowing what to hold on to, what to let go of, and what truly matters when night falls. For medieval farmers, the goal was not perfect sleep, it was sleep sufficient to live another day. And sometimes that modest goal brings more peace than all our modern striving. If you are listening to this story before sleep, you may not need to learn anything more. You may only need to allow yourself to feel this. You do not always have to be strong, alert, or productive. Sometimes the wisest thing is simply to lie down, slow your breath, and trust that the night will pass, just as people long ago trusted winter after winter. This boring historical story does not aim to deliver a grand conclusion. It simply opens a quiet space where you can set yourself down, like placing a familiar old coat gently over your shoulders. If you feel a little lighter, a little calmer, or a little sleepier, then the story has done its job. Before we truly drift into sleep, please allow me to offer a sincere thank you to you for taking the time to slow down, to listen, and to accompany this channel during such a private moment before rest. If these slow historical stories bring you a sense of calm, please consider liking the video, sharing it with others who may need a gentler night, and subscribing to the channel so we can continue returning together to older rhythms of life where history is not loud or stressful but whispers softly, just enough to guide you into sleep. Thank you for being here. Wishing you a peaceful night, a deep sleep, and a morning that arrives slowly.